Just when you think you know everything about the space program, did you know that the Apollo 11 astronauts were in quarantine? Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. I am Chris Gore. If you've been watching this show, you know I am a huge fan of NASA. I live in Pasadena, California, very close to JPL. I have gone on their tour, and if you are a fan of the space program and all things NASA, do yourself a favor and go on that tour at JPL. It's awesome. There's even a great gift shop where you can get that freeze-dried ice cream that astronauts eat. But I am a huge fan. I grew up just loving everything NASA, and the Apollo 11 mission, of course, for mankind was a huge step forward. But there's a part of that story that people don't really know. And Todd Miller, the filmmaker behind Apollo 11 Quarantine, is here to talk to us on the Film Threat Podcast. Todd, welcome to the Film Threat Show here.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
I loved your film. I guess you could say it was kind of a prequel to this. The Quarantine is a short film that will be shown in IMAX. And let me just say, I think that IMAX, I know 3D is all the rage with the kids, but IMAX to me is the format that is so incredibly immersive as to be indescribable. When you are seated in exactly the right spot in an IMAX screen, it's immersive. It's also, you can get a little dizzy at times. Your Apollo 11 film that preceded this one was huge. I mean, it was, the timing of it was perfect. Before you got to Quarantine, tell me a little bit about that documentary.
Well, unlike right now, I really had the pleasure of making that film, over the course of several years, and then probably more importantly, getting time to share it with audiences throughout the world. I think probably the biggest thing, I was thinking about this recently. The biggest surprise for me was the international audience. You think of the Apollo program, and you think of it as this American story and rah rah, USA. But everywhere I went, when we had the film out back in 2019, so many people from other countries were coming up and sharing their own connection with them. They brought, their kids with them so they can experience it. And I was really struck by how people really didn't know that story. They knew that we had landed on the moon, but 50 plus years had gone by. So now with this Quarantine film, which was really a product of the pandemic, we get to tell even a lesser known story of that same mission.
Well, it's interesting. I didn't know that story. So I found it fascinating. Were the scientists at the time really concerned that, I mean, this sounds like, the plot of a science fiction movie, and I know it actually has been the plot of several science fiction movies, but an astronaut bringing back some contagion or something that be lethal to humans on the planet Earth. They really had those fears back then.
Yeah, in fact, the National Academy of Sciences was really the first to raise this. They coined the term moon germs at the time and raised this with NASA. They've thought of this years and years before, and also they thought these moon germs could potentially contain extraterrestrial life, which could impact humanity and worst case scenario kill off humans. But NASA did take it very seriously. In fact, they built a lunar receiving laboratory, which we highlight in the film, which ironically is getting demolished as we speak. But it was just cutting edge, facility that was used to not only house the astronauts, the lunar material that they brought back, but an entire support staff. And then also the people that were studying these first pieces of rock and dust that were brought back from another world for the first time. And then also just the transporting of all of that material. So if you remember, the command module impacted in the Pacific Ocean, the astronauts get into their biological isolation garments with full gas masks. They go via helicopter to a aircraft carrier. That aircraft carrier has a mobile quarantine facility. We highlight in the film. It looks like a shiny Winnebago. And that thing got, once the ship made it to Hawaii, they jam it into the back of a plane, and that plane goes off to Houston.
Oh, I think, I lost you for a second, but that's okay.
Amazing
material
back and safely to just try to quash any kind of alarms that they might have about, infecting the planet with these germs.
Well, I'm really curious, like, exactly what they did. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like. This precedes streaming services, so there were only 3 networks. But it seems like, I mean, the way you show in the documentary, they kind of, I don't want to say they had a good time in quarantine, but they kind of like knew what they signed up for, and they made the best of it. So what exactly did you discover in finding this footage? I mean, this is obviously something you didn't include in your initial documentary. I mean, something that maybe some might consider a DVD extra, but it's really fascinating and timely now, right? This is not something we think, quarantine is something we've gotten used to, and a concept we all understand, but this preceded all of that. So how did they spend their time?
Yeah, well, first off, like a lot of filmmakers, we were on to our next project at the beginning of last year, and had been working on another thing for quite a while, and it effectively got shut down. So we were still in the process of delivering materials back into the National Archive system, and as I started looking at some of this footage, which amounted to, let's just make kind of a quick little 5-minute thing and kick it out. But kind of like Apollo 11, the feature-length film, it kind of took on a life of its own. And then you have all the events that happened last year with the racial justice movement over the summer, the ramp up to the election, even the riot on the Capitol. Our film ends in the same U.S. chamber that in the Capitol building where that riot took place. And I think when we were working with all that material, particularly in the back half of last year, and things were so tense in the country, it really hit home that this was, in a lot of ways, paralleled, our time right now. It was a contemporary example or a historical example of things that were happening, right now. So, what was interesting about back then was how serious they took the potential threat, and I was really interested in putting the puzzle pieces together, because there was a lot of historical inaccuracies on how they actually transported these materials. One source would say this, and the other source would say that. For instance, the rock boxes were mislabeled in some places with the film negative. But it's just interested to see how all that got back. And it got back there because of people. And some of the people that were of the most interest to me were these little kind of hidden stories that we found. One guy, John Hirosaki, who was the first Asian American, one of the first Asian American engineers at NASA, just happened to be, he grew the short straw and was one of only 2 other people that were embedded in that mobile quarantine facility with the 3 astronauts, the other being a surgeon. And he was embedded that entire with some more support staff back in Houston. And his job was to not only to keep the rock boxes safe, but he also, when the command's module got back to Houston, he actually was there to inspect it and clean it and make sure it was good to go, and then begin the job of studying it. So that was really kind of the pool. So what started off as something that was kind of, seemed like a simple exercise, much like Apollo 11, ended up being, a lot more involved. And it was great to work with, everybody that I worked with on Apollo 11 too. And particularly with everything going on last year, it was nice that, we could all work on something.
Well, it's funny to me, how the most mundane details of a NASA mission are just so exciting. I don't know, like actually handling the film, that where you show them handling the film that they brought back. I mean, that was just, I thought that was amazing. When did NASA learn that like stuff on the moon is fairly inert, right? Did they, or are there still protocols in place, or have they determined now scientifically that like, hey, there's not much that we're going to bring back that's going to be lethal?
Yeah, I think well, to your first point, they took great care to ensure that the documentation, which was primarily all on film. I mean, they did have a slow scan downlink of of the moon landing, or not of the landing, but of them actually on the moon. But the real documentation was all these film reels. So if you can imagine, they're shoved into this tiny little command module that splashes down in an ocean and then has to be transported on planes and ships and whatnot. So they took great care just to make sure that the evidence of it happening was ensured. But yeah, they're, I guess on Apollo 12, they did not have the full-on biological isolation garments. They chose to just put them in gas masks. So they knew pretty much by the end of the quarantine period, probably a couple weeks in, that there wasn't really going to be a threat. But they waited until they actually got all of the lunar material in a sealed environment in the lunar receiving laboratory, had scientists study it, which we show in the film, the first boxes being opened up. And they tested it on things and made sure that it wasn't going to harm anybody or any living organisms. So by Apollo 13, of course, that was the one that never made it to the moon. But 14, 15, and 16 and 17, 17 being the last mission, those guys got to stand on the carrier after they splashed down and wave to the cameras and give speeches. So they were pretty much in the clear by then.
It's funny how it seems that each Apollo mission, they were kind of guinea pigs in a sense, that there were certain things that were tested. But the documentary is fantastic. It's on IMAX screens, right? Where IMAX screens are open, the short. And I just have enjoyed, even if it's a subject, like I'm obviously really interested in Apollo stuff, but IMAX, for some reason, that format I find so engaging that I'll see a subject matter. I saw one on volcanoes that I thought was so, I have no interest in volcanoes, but having seen that IMAX film on volcanoes, I was really drawn in. Todd, it's been great talking to you on the Film Threat podcast. I hope, last time we spoke, you were at South by Southwest in Austin. Your movie had just opened. It was a couple of years ago. I hope we get back to South by Southwest in Austin again. But congratulations on the film. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks so much for having me. I hope to see you soon.
All right, take care.